Happy birthday to us. Happy birthday to us. Happy birthday to Fellowship in Essential Oils. Happy birthday to us. We're 50, Liz. This is our 50th episode.
You warned me of that. I was like, what? 50? Some of us are 52, but 50 episodes. Goodness me. Well, that's amazing, isn't it? And how much information are we batted backwards and forth in that time, I wonder?
Well, that's
Huge
a lot.
amount.
It amazes me that we've talked about 50 essential oils, and I know that we've still got more that we're like, oh, we have to do that one yet. There is an amazing array of essential oils in the world, isn't there?
There are, and you know what I like? I mean, we didn't plan to have this conversation, but what I like is it's not all about the physical body, natural, and we never planned it this way, but naturally our consciousness has expanded right out of that into the mythical sort of realms, and it really makes me think differently about essential oils. It's I really enjoy this exploration with you, Adam, I have to say.
Likewise, likewise. And I think what's really interesting is how often we see parallels between the physical and the mystical as well.
Yeah, that's true, and I think perhaps there's none more so than with the oil that we're going to talk about today, Yarrow. So
Yes. So,
I know that everybody knows the first myth. So I think I'm safe in saying, do you want to tell the first myth? And then I will build out from there because I've spent quite a lot of time thinking about Yarrow mythically.
well, the main myth, I believe, is from its Latin name, which is Achillea millefolium. Am I getting that right?
Millefolium. Yeah, 1,000
Millefolium.
leaves, millefolium.
Yes. And that's with a reference to Achilles. And I don't. There may be a story about it. I just know that it was kind of he used it as a for protection and for healing when he was in battle.
Oh, so no, there's a much bigger myth than that.
Well,
So
I'll sit down and cozy up to the
Achilles.
story.
Yeah, yes, yes. I mean, and then it's fundamental to really understanding the medicine of it. And I can never quite get my head around. Well, how did that plant become to be known as this? And I do think that potentially people knew the uses of the plant, and then it got transferred over to the myth. So you're quite right that it grows particularly everywhere here around wastelands, so on battlefields. Correct. But so Achilles was a warrior. We see him. He appears in both particularly the Iliad, but also in the Odyssey. And he was kind of like a demigod-ish. So his parentage is really interesting in that his father was Peleus, who was mortal, human, and his mother was Thetis, who was an Oceanid, so she was a water nymph, but specifically a sea nymph. And the famous story about Achilles is he was dipped in the river Styx. So his mother Thetis knew that if she dipped him in the river Styx, she could make him immortal and immune to being hurt in any way. And so she did. As a baby, she held him by the back of his heel, and she dipped him into the water, and everything in the Styx protected his whole body. But of course, that little bit where she was holding him never touched the water. So what was that then, do you think? That was his Achilles heel. We
Achilles.
all have the Achilles heel. That's where it comes from. And of course, the Achilles tendon is down the back of the neck, the back of the foot, down the back of the leg. So this is like the most famous aspect of this warrior's life, that he was so well protected, almost by magic. But there was always this one little thing that would flare up. And the most important thing to know about Yarrow as an essential oil is it is an incredible anti-inflammatory and anesthetic. So if you've never worked with it, it's the most beautiful blue color. So you might
I brought show and tell today.
oh, do it. Yeah.
So here we go. So this is in pomegranate seed oil, but you'll see this beautiful royal blue color. which is stunning.
Yeah, so you are looking at that, you might think, oh, it's a blue plant. It's not, it's a white plant. And heat activates that. You can have a blue face now.
I will. Yes, but I find it good for the face.
So again, like when you see German chamomile being distilled, the flowers are not blue, but as it comes out and you can see it coming into the alembic part of the still, then this beautiful blue liquid, and that is a specific chemical which is called azulines. Azulines are blue. And there are some mushrooms and toadstools over sort of in South America that have this same azulene component. And it's incredible. I always talk about it being liquid anesthetic. It is so, it's like a numbing. And I'll do a bit of a spoiler just because it's a comparison. So next week we'll talk about valerian. And valerian is numbing in a different way. So valerian takes you into like this torpor, this almost sleepy torpor where you are like emotionally numb, a bit like morphine, I guess. But yarrow is the opposite of that. It will heal the skin, but allow you to get on with things. So going back to Achilles, we talked about this interesting parentage that he had. His father, as I say, was mortal Peleus, but he was a myrmidon. So myrmidons are a fascinating race. Looking at it from a bee medicine point of view, we're thinking with a Melissa head on. Myrmidons were men, but they were an ant race. They were tiny, tiny warriors and very scrappy. So that's the first thing that you should know about Achilles, is he has this scrappy nature about him. And there's lots of things about his personality that we can read into his parentage. So, for example, we think about fire ants, the myrmidons may be fire ants. And indeed, we talked that Achilles' name is Achilles Pyrrhus, as in red-haired. So we have this like this flamey, fiery nature about him. And as a child, his father had received an oracle that had said that Achilles would be killed at Troy. So his parents loving him. I mean, his mum had already like tried to make him immortal by dipping in the river Styx, but that wasn't enough. And his father said, no, I'm not prepared to take this risk. And he sends him to a court far away, and he's left in this court to exist. But they conceal him by dressing him as a girl, and he has to pass as being a girl in female clothes. So I mean, that's an interesting element, because you know, if he was a big bloke, that's not going to happen, is it? So that probably tells us interesting things about him. And it's the first time that we notice that he has a shapeshift and sort of element to him, and this comes up a lot through different ways through his story, that he can conceal himself in interesting ways. He can adapt. He knows what it takes. And if you think about this young man whose father is an ant person, and his mother is a water nymph, and he has red hair. Well, it's how did he pass off? How did people not notice that he was there? So he must have had this incredible way about him, and potentially he's quite effeminate in nature. And indeed, a really important part of his story is he grew up with a childhood friend called Patroclus, and Patroclus appears many times in his story. And so probably I should go back and say, so they concealed him in this court for a long time, until it was then his father had another oracle that said, Troy can't be won without Achilles. And so they go and find him, and he's taken. And he is this incredible warrior. You know, he goes from this person that passes as a female to being this destroyer who goes into regions. And we're told that he overcame 12 different regions around Troy. So like 12 is quite a magical number. You know, the 12 months, the 12 disciples, you know, this is a completion number. And then he goes to Agamemnon, who is this enormous, great, powerful, terrifying king, and says, I need you to relinquish one of your prisoners. You've taken prisoner and taken a girl to be your wife, to be one of your wives, and I need her because she's the daughter of a priest, and this priest is a priest of Apollo, and Apollo, I can't like bring Apollo down, like subdue him, appease him. That's what I'm call. Can't appease Apollo without this. So he manages this incredible, like hostage transfer, and doing it. He Agamemnon has his piece of meat and said, "Well, I want your favorite slave," and he takes him back. But now he is becoming very tired and weary, and he they know that the troops will not be rallied without Achilles. Achilles is a bit like having Beckham on the playing field. You know, if Beckham's off, it's all going to go to pot. So Patroclus takes his place, and he wears this armor that Achilles has got. And that's interesting to me, because why does Achilles need this magical armor, this like fantastic armor? Because he's already got a magical armor. But Patroclus is killed, and eventually we in the Iliad we don't hear of the death of Achilles. The story ends before he dies, but another author picks it up in the Odyssey, and we see the funeral of Patroclus in the Iliad, and that's a really important story. We're talking about a myth here, you know, this is a myth, but it becomes, this funerary rite becomes a part of religion in Greece. So at the Panathenaic Games in June every year, this story is recited, and they, particularly the funerary rites of Patroclus, are recited as a means of teaching everybody how to do a funeral. So funerals weren't presided over by priests. Families did their own funerals. And when I was studying the Melissa work, there was a lot in Crete at a place called Eleutherna. And Eleutherna is an acropolis. And they actually excavated a site and could see the funerary rite, and were able to look and say that's exactly as Homer described it. So we know that is correct. So there was this big funerary rite for Patroclus, and then when we go to the Odyssey, we're told that when Achilles died, he was buried with Patroclus. Because they enjoyed a love that would not be named, which is interesting, or that could not be named. So on one side, we're told that he's this like effeminate creature who can pass in a harem, but also in our day and age, you might say, well, oh, maybe it was a homosexual love, but that kind of makes no sense, because in Greece, that wasn't a love that could not be named. You know, it was going on everywhere. You know, So what was it? And so this is quite an interesting thing to contemplate, because Yarrow is very good. I haven't really touched on the physical medicine at all. I will, but in the emotional medicine, it's very good for that soothing nature of those kind of relationships where you just don't know, and you're like, what am I to you? You know, what are we doing here? That soothing nature of like, it goes round and round and round in your head. And we talked about the 12 regions, how it's cyclical. And that is very much a part of Yarrow's medicine, those things that keep coming round, and or even that the plan just keeps changing. You know, first I'm supposed to be in a harem, next I'm at the front, then it's just driven. And I mentioned at the beginning how this like magical molecule, these azulines, also appears in blue chamomile, in German chamomile. So you would think that the medicines are similar, and they definitely are from a physical point of view, that they are soothing, that they are anti-inflammatory. And blue chamomile, valerian, and yarrow. That's my very favorite numbing medicine. You know, I use it all the time. But blue chamomile is dainty, and it's kind of got this, well, yeah, whatever kind of nature. You can think of how the plant is like buffeted, and she's just so just go with the flow. She's the ultimate hippie, is the chamomile. Whereas yarrow is like for the person that is, he's the adventurer. He does what it takes. And funny enough, when we're looking at my backdrop because we're decorating and things are coming together in here. And I was like, oh God, I've got nothing behind me except my box of oils. And I thought, do you know what? That's such a good like representation of Yarrow, because it's like, right, camp here, do what it is, get out. You know, he's like that. And I can't you can't go out and battle, you're bleeding, right, we'll get the yarrow on it, just, you know, it's skip ticket, stops the bleeding. And it just grows everywhere around here. And funny enough, I mean, it's kind of a tangent, but in COVID, I really noticed how we had a tremendous year of apples, because I live in Apple County here. We had this surge of apples, and there was just so much bounty. It was growing everywhere, which was lovely because, of course, people were in their gardens, weren't they? But since that time, yarrow has just burst forth everywhere. And as a little girl, I don't remember seeing it that much, but now you can just walk and it's like picking daisies. You know, it's everywhere. And it's almost like, well, you know, everybody's hurting at the moment. Everybody is hurting. You know, that like REM song, Everybody Hurts Sometimes. It's like yarrow's just growing there. Just pick it, you know, a bit like dandelion, not that dandelion, dock leaves, you know, that nature knows, and it's just there. So you can really imagine these warriors 2,000 years ago, and you can imagine how the cauldron on the fire, and they're just throwing this yarrow in and boiling it, and all of this blue liquid for everybody to just like, oh, clean the wounds, because it is very antimicrobial, very antibacterial. And actually it's one of the few medicines that is well, to say sanctified, that's the wrong word, but you're allowed to use it orally as a medicine for like colitis. So you can drink it down inside and soothe the gut. So this thing of anti-inflammatory, it's really, really important. And I really like that he has red hair, that he is Achilles Pyrrhus, because one of my favorite medicines for eczema is geranium, that like that skin that reacts. You know, he's got this idea that he's redheaded and he's reactive, you know, like the like Irish warriors, the Celtic warriors, he's reactive. But you can put it on the most sensitive skins. It's so gentle. It's a tremendous healer. I love yarrow. So I'm sure I've got loads of other things to say, but I'll take a breath and let you speak.
Oh, one thing that I'm going to kind of pinpoint in there that really stood out to me, it's an aspect of yarrow that I haven't considered before, is when you were talking about the relationship side of how, you know, I'm reminded I'm talking to a friend at the moment who's just started dating a guy, and there's this kind of like trying to work out what we are. We need to sit down and have a conversation and that kind of thing. And like you said, all relationships have that cyclical nature. And kind of the phrase that popped into my head as you were talking is, it is what it is with Yarrow. And I think Yarrow would actually give a bit of ease to that pressure when, you know, what was their relationship? We don't know. Does it matter? Do we need to name what the love was? Sometimes we just need to go with the flow and just enjoy it as it is. So I think if there's anyone dealing with the pressure of needing to know, I think Yarrow might be really helpful in that aspect.
Yeah, and which kind of frames it in a nice way that you're enjoying the relationship. But there's also that a side where if you're the person that's, you know, if you're with somebody that you really like and they're a game player, then that's quite that's very hurtful. that really, really hurts. And so
Mm.
that salve, because I I haven't put them out, but I've been collecting loads and loads of Greek bottles to use as my backdrop, and most of them are perfume bottles, but there are a couple that are a salve bottle. So they've got like a solid perfuming, and it is a salve. It's like myrrh. Myrrh can be a perfume, but it's just, I mean, it doesn't even smell that nice, to be honest. So you wouldn't use it like very often in a perfume kind of thing, but it's just put it on, just soothe. So I think that's interesting. But we talked about how his father is an ant, and we talked about the fire ants. So of course that itching, that soreness, that burning, all of those things, all of those are yarrow. But also like how he's very clearly a little bloke, he's a scrappy little bloke, but what a warrior. We all know somebody like that, like, almost like the angry little, he's all lithe. So you can kind of see his nature straight away, but you might think he was like, yeah, embodied the Mars energy because of the fire ant and stuff, but it's more subtle than that, because remember that his mother is water. So
Mm.
he's the ultimate like shape. There isn't a bigger shape shifter than water, is there? We hear how Jesus walks on water when we're impressed, and then we think, well, was it winter though? You know, it could have been ice.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not belittling that story. I'm just showing the nature of how water changes. But also this idea that there are no obstacles where there's water. Water will just find its way through the smallest thing. And so although he is a warrior, he's the ultimate warrior. He has that Athena mentality of, well, like Athena can shapeshift into she's an owl, isn't she? He knows how to shapeshift in many different ways. And so it's very intelligent medicine. So again, while it definitely works on the physical body, because we've talked about things like tendonitis for like the Achilles tendon, bursitis, those kind of things. We talked about colitis. In fact, I should point this out because maybe people don't know this. Did you know that the suffix itis means inflammation? So bursitis, inflammation, colitis, all of those things. If it's got itis on the end, get your yarrow out every time. But also, I've lost my track now. Went off. How? Yes, so it is a physical medicine, but also the mental medicine of, right, I just have to stop thinking about that and concentrate. And I can't have inflamed tempers. I cannot be led by my temper. I just have to be a bit cleverer than that. Those kinds of Athena things of how he's strategic, right? And well, I've got to do a deal with Agamemnon. I'm absolutely full of rage, but somehow I've got to persuade him to do what I want him to do. Calm that rage, calm that inflammation, calm it. It's very good from that point of view of just going, right, I need to stop thinking about that. I need to switch that off. I need to shapeshift from being this person to a different person. I don't know if you have this archetype, because it's very much a British archetype. Maybe it never made it across the sea because it would be hilarious if it did. Do you know who Wurzel Gummidge was?
No, the name sounds slightly familiar, but no.
So you're probably too young anyway. But so Wurzel Gummidge was a children's program when we were little. It was the star of it was John Pertwee, who was one of the first, or possibly the first Doctor Who, but that's irrelevant. But what Wurzel Gummidge could do, because obviously scarecrows have like made heads, don't they? He could put a different head on, and he would like and actually how that didn't scare me, I don't know, but it didn't. So he'd have a different hat, but also he'd speak differently, and he'd be a different person. And so he was really early shapeshifter, wasn't he? My knowledge. But it is like that. Yarrow's able to go, yeah, you need to stop thinking like that and think like that. And and it's not necessarily like, it doesn't go through a metamorphosis. It just goes, I am that and I'm that. You know, I well, okay, so I'll use me now. So I go from, many of you will know now that the silent one has cancer. I go from being in there looking like a bedraggled person, and then I have to come on here and talk. You know, there is a huge shift required to be able to do that, and sometimes you won't naturally have the ability to do that. You know, it's too much. But we've all had times where we might, well, yeah, that relationship's really pants. I feel very upset about it. I've had that argument, but I can't take it to work. You know, all of these situations where there's a shift, they're Yarrow moments.
So with you talking about it being great for any itis or any inflammation, and inflammation being the leading cause of death of humans around this planet, is it an oil that you find you use a lot?
I love Yarrow. Yes, I do. I get through obscene amounts of Yarrow, and it would be obscene, but think about how I've just said how it's such a sustainable thing. You know, it's everywhere. So, well, particularly in the UK, and I think I'm sure people in Europe will say the same to me. Does it grow in Australia?
Not natively in Australia, no. So it's not
No,
something
because
you
it
see
does quite.
commonly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is a weed, and it does like wet. It likes wet springs, which of course you do not have, and we have in plenty here. Um, but also like, well, you know how I said he was scrappy? It's scrappy. You know, it finds its way into nooks, and it drives Daryl mad. He's like, we're not putting any more in that garden. I'm like, yeah, no, we are. But but it's like the tiniest little hole. It'll be like, hi. Why are you in my garden again? It just knows how to do it. It appears. So again, you've got that shapeshifter thing. So it is a very sustainable. It's quite costly though. Costs quite a lot because the distillation is quite expensive. I think probably has got quite a small yield of essential oil. I mean, I'm not a distiller, so I don't know, but I would have thought. But yeah, it's a really, you know, if you are worried about I'm using too much frankincense, because it has a lot of the similar kinds of properties for inflammation, particularly its acts on, I talk about how frankincense restores elasticity. Well, yarrow is really good backup as that. So use less frankincense, more yarrow.
And for those using Yarrow at home, is topical use wherever the inflammation is would be the main way of using it? Yeah.
Yeah, well, yes, but remember that how essential oils work is they go through the skin and into the bloodstream and they'll circulate. So, like at the moment, Daryl's got a lot of inflammation in his mouth, and we can use, I am using some hydrolats, but just putting essential oils onto him topically onto his neck, it's slower. It's definitely slower, but it will get there. And so if you can put it on the place, ideal, but sometimes you can't. So yeah.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to run by you that I've heard a couple of references to the word purging being used with Yarrow as well, more from an emotional point of view, and that we have found that some people using it, you know, there are times that we always talk about we've got to get rid of, you know, the past pain and the past suffering, and you know we've got to purge all that type of thing. But I think there's a time and a place for that. And you know, if we're already dealing with, you know, some big stress or an important aspect of our lives, now's not the time to, you know, to vomit out more emotional stuff. And that does tend to have that effect. So if someone is not ready to bring up and purge, then yarrow on an emotional level might not be a wise choice.
I personally, I wouldn't have said that it was like a purging oil. It seems to me like the ultimate sticking plaster. You know, let's just well, like the perhaps the most okay. So I'm going to talk about this on a really practical level and then on a metaphysical level. The 21st century speak parlance would be, let's just put a pin in that.
Yeah.
you know. We'll deal with that later. There's other stuff going on. That's Yarrow. But also, like, if you, sorry for using the word like, if you are looking at it through somebody's aura and they are using Yarrow, the medicine happens way out here as well as here. So you do have that spiritual healing. You do have like that sense of like ancestral healing that's going on. So there is that purge, but it doesn't vomit forth. That's what I'm trying to say. So it's out. It is subtly going on, very, very subtly. And that's probably the Azulines, because remember how I said that that chamomile is the ultimate hippie, oh, it's just happening. That happens out in the aura too. It's very, very subtle healing, and it doesn't really come through on the physical body at all. It is certainly an angelic realm healer, in the same way that you've got Angelica. Again, I talk about Valerian. Those things that are so deep, they go really deep into the medicine. But I'm trying to think of an oil that would really, so basil. If you use basil for healing a cough, the words that have not wanted to be spoken come spewing out, and it's not very nice. It's not very nice. The things that got to be said get said. Yarrow just goes, right, just quietly in the background, we'll just get on with this because he's got other things to do. So when you were talking about, it's not ideally the thing for purging, you've got to get on with it. It doesn't have that idea. Well, purge means that rush of energy. It doesn't have that. It's just very much like, you do what you've got to do. I'll get on with this. It's very quiet in the background.
Yeah. Would you say it would be a cleansing oil?
Well, it's antimicrobial. So it definitely is a cleansing oil on the physical body. I wouldn't use it for emotional cleansing. Just thinking. One moment, please. I've got the blossoming heart by the side of me. Let's see what Robbie says of it. See if it's in there. Ooh. See, would normally have done this, but I don't even know if it's in here. But if you don't know, this is Robbie Zeck. She does aromatic kinesiology, and what she doesn't know about the emotional uses of an essential oil, you could write on the back of a postage stamp. Yarrow. She says balanced versus erratic, which is very much what I said, wasn't it? That he has to like stop his behavior and center himself and talk. You become truly part of the world when you recognize how its contradictions and its beauty live in you. So she says, Yarrow, oh yeah, I did think about saying this and I didn't. So Yarrow is a sacred plant of ancient China, superbly represents the qualities of yin and yang. The outer stem of the plant is hard and strong, a yang and masculine quality. The inner stem is filled with a soft substance, a yin or feminine quality. And everything in the universe is a manifestation of these two opposite energies, which have to balance and attract each other. To be effective, we must have a balance of both masculine and feminine energy. And that's absolutely in his myth, isn't it? So Yarrow stabilizes polar opposites within the body and is useful during times of major life changes when emotional equilibrium needs greater support. So Yarrow will bring balance when your life is testing you on your weaknesses and your behavior is erratic and you know you are behaving badly. Just as nature impressively romps between mayhem and order, recognize that your own rhythm is echoed here. So I don't know if you can see it. That is called the Blossoming Heart. Let's have a look what Gabriel has to say, which is making sure we're doing no copywriting here, healing the spirit. I can't remember how to find. Oh, it's easy to find things in this book. Yarrow. Oh, I have highlighted things in here and everything. It says, that's interesting. I didn't know that. It said, however, it's a term given to its generic name, Achillea, which is most revealing. Long valued for its wound healing properties, it was dedicated to Achilles, a wrathful warrior of Homer's Iliad. According to the legend, Achilles employed the plant during the Trojan War to cure his comrade Telephus of a spear wound. So that's interesting. This is even actually in there. Yeah, so that's interesting. He said that the folklore surrounding the plant extended to matters of love and loyalty, and we've talked about how his strange relationship with Patroclus, and it's a test of fidelity. He talks about, and yeah, I did know this and I forgot. If you use the plant, like pick the plant and put it in your nostrils, it stops a nosebleed. So it's very good at stopping bleeding. But again, those things that I've highlighted in there are all itis. So there's no need to read them all out. So basically, this. So we've got inflammation, we've got analgesia, we've got stops bleeding, and we've got the ability to be able to get on with it. And as I say, it's really a time of great adventure when you're using Yarrow. It's not for people that live small, not at all. Yeah. It's not for those that are just like, oh, we'll just, you know, the camomiles for those guys. It's like, kind of, we've got to drive forward and get on with it. And I'm the kind of person that does this a lot, I have to say. Goes back to work before I'm well enough. Those kind of people really, it's still sore. That's a really good use of Yarrow. What would be better is not going back to work. But if they insist on doing that, then Yarrow is good. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned putting the stalks up your nose. You know, with any kind of cut, I would initially go for helichrysum as, you know, the liquid stitches. But would you apply Yarrow to a blood nose, or would you use it when it's
so it wouldn't be the stalk. The stalk is hard. It's the leaves. Use the leaves. They're like feathers, so perhaps you haven't seen it. They're really, really delicate, like feathers, and they feel velvety soft. So they're very, very gentle. So you could, and because they've got like thousands of fronds, you can fold them up. And it's like putting a tissue up your nose. So you wouldn't use a stalk. I think that I knew we were going to get to helichrysum sooner or later in this conversation, and I pondered it earlier, and I don't know the answer. You and I both came to the same conclusion in different ways, which shocked the hell out of me when it happened. That helichrysum's for the wound that will not heal.
Yes.
And I think so. I always use I've turned into a person that uses I can't bear it. I can hear myself doing it. I use the expression or the example of twins. That was their birthright, and it's not great being a twin sometimes. You know, you just can't get out of it. And actually, you wouldn't want to, because the only way that's going to happen is one of them dies, isn't it? So you wouldn't want that to happen, and that's kind of helichrysum medicine, or that you've gone through this horrific thing like a stillborn child or a dreadful road accident or PTSD, and you have this gold knowledge that no one else has because they weren't there, they didn't do it. That's a helichrysum kind of healing. The worst life experiences, helichrysum's there. So that's because it's ruled by Chiron, the wound and the wounded healer. So we see the wound. and the wound festers and the wound heals, but there's probably shrapnel below it long term. Yarrow is heal it, get on. We'll deal with this later. So we're going back to it later with helichrysum, really. But also, I think when I stuttered earlier, it was because I could really feel the work that Valerie Ann Warwood's doing coming through, and I couldn't quite articulate it. She does work with ancestral memory in work called Aroma Genera. Kathy Skipper does similar work with lineage, the ancestral. She works with the ancestral trauma of the mother line. I won't go into that. You should check out her. If you don't, go and have a look for Aromanosis. There's loads of stuff on YouTube. It's fantastic content that she and Florian put out. But you will have these wounds and they can be addressed, but Yarrow, as you say, just kind of puts a pin in it and says, but we can't deal with that now. So, for example, what was coming through when I was thinking about Valerie's work was when we were in Beijing together. She was talking to me. I can't remember if it was her or maybe it was Colleen Thompson that had been healing a lady who had got eating disorders. And this woman had profound anorexia. And what came to the surface was that she had real guilt over the fact that she had so much food available to her when her grandmother had starved in Auschwitz. Where do you start with that? You know, that's just brought forward. And in the same way, her grandmother, there's no way she could have translated, I must be careful about this food because maybe years later my granddaughter will inherit this. You can't. You just do what you have to do. So those are the very different things, you know, that Yarrow says we do it now, forget everything else, this is what's in front of me.
Yeah. And I guess also thinking back to the battlefield, when you get an injury, you don't go, oh, I've got an ouchie, I'm just going to go back and retire. You're in the middle of battle. The only way forward is forward. You've got to keep fighting it, even if you do have an injury. So I guess that's where Yarrow comes in of like, let's patch it up. That'll do for now. Keep fighting.
Exactly. And if you put that into the context of the myth, do we think that he would have wanted to send Patroclus out into the field? No. Not at all. He knew what was coming. That he knew that his family had been told he was going to die at Troy. So he knew that he had this distinctive armor. He was putting Patroclus in fear's way, you know.
Yeah.
He was going to be, like I said about Beckham, it can't happen without that massive like linchpin in the team. He was the linchpin, but he had to do what he had to do.
Very much so. Now, a couple of things that I find Yarrow to be really good for on that magical level as well, as we've talked about, it's a white flowered plant. White flowered plants typically are really good for any kind of moon work, especially full moon work. We've talked about that balance between yin and yang. So, you know, we always go, oh, well, the moon is typically seen as being a yin, a feminine energy, but it's always good to remember that the full moon is actually the reflection of the sun on the moon, which gives it its full glory. So without the sun, the moon wouldn't shine. So it is when we have that balance between yin and yang. So Yarrow really kind of harnesses that energy as well. But also one thing that occurred to me when I was kind of, you know, gathering and, you know, collating all the information I could find about Yarrow is what I find whenever I'm working with, whether it be a crystal or an essential oil, you'll find, you know, different myths that are different regions kind of thing, that things may have been in Egypt and you'll also see it in Greece or something like that. And you find the similarity and that kind of reinforces what you believe. When I was kind of reading through Yarrow and researching Yarrow, I found, you know, lots of references in the West, you know, around Achilles, around healing of wounds, around protection, around that warrior energy. But then, in China, where it's also used, you talked about it being that they see it as a plant that is the most balanced between yin and yang. And it's also used in the I Ching, which is a Eastern form of divination, where they'll actually use the yarrow stalks as in the I Ching for casting readings and things like that. So I'm like, okay, so I've got protection, healing, overcoming our enemies and adversity, divination or guidance, and harmony and balance and kind of justice in that type of way. And then there's kind of one of those voices in my head. I don't know how many voices there are in my head. When Archangel Michael, when you think about Archangel Michael, what is he? He's a warrior angel who protects. He helps us overcome our demons, which, we see that typical picture of him with his head on a demon, and we may not be fighting, these grueling, horned things, but we're all dealing with our own inner demons. And I feel Yarrow can work really powerfully with that. But he also guides us along our spiritual path. He helps us find that harmony. He helps us to find that justice as well. So I think that anyone who wants to work with Archangel Michael more, Yarrow would be great. The kind of grand finale of that is when we talk about Michael, often there are two kind of shades of color that come up. He is the guardian of the element of fire. So red is often associated with him. Sometimes rubies are associated with him. But then it is that royal blue. And that's why stones like lapis lazuli might be associated with them. And to come around full circle, when we look at the color of yarrow, it is probably, of all the blue oils, you've mentioned German chamomile. There's also Australian blue cypress. There is also blue tansy. But yarrow has this beautiful richness to it that's probably the most noble of them all as well. So I think anyone who wants to align with Archangel Michael a little bit more, yarrow would be absolutely great.
I think that's very clever. One thing that jumped out to me when you were talking about the full moon, did you know that the full moon is also called battle moon?
No, I did not know that.
Yeah, so if you are a general in a war, quite often the big battles are run by the moons, because stop doing it, watching too much YouTube. As you, particularly for air raids, as you're looking down, you can see more of what's gone down below because it's illuminated by the moon.
Of course, yeah. I think about where we have a full moon here, and I look outside, and my partner, who's just moved from living in Dubai for 13 years to coming to the bushlands of Australia, you can't tell the difference. It's always lit up in a big city, but out here in the bush, we look outside and you can actually see the trees, and sometimes the birds sing all night because it is so illuminated. So it does make sense if you're going into battle, you've got that kind of cover of night, but you're not in absolute darkness. So yeah, that makes total sense.
So you don't need to put the lights on the planes. I was going to say something else off that. What was I going to say? I don't know. But also, entirely unrelated, there was something else to the moon, but it's gone. No, actually related to the moon. I can come back to it. So when we're talking about the battle and how the planes go, then that is the culmination of all the plans, which is exactly what we do in moon medicine. Full moon is when you expect things to come to manifestation, to come to culmination. That is seen in the physical plane. Airplanes leave on the day of the full moon. So that is your most vulnerable day, because if you're going to get bombed, you're probably going to get bombed on a full moon. Certainly in the Second World War, you can track it, but also your most powerful day. So that I would say that most women would really kind of tap into that as well. This idea of menstruation, and incidentally, fantastic oil for menstrual problems, because it will settle the clotting, but also settle the pain. You have a much better flow of blood because we've got his flow mother. She's got the water element, much better flow. I also wanted to, you touched on about the angelic nature and in Egypt, and anything to do with blue in Egypt should make us stop and take pause and think of Tutankhamun's mask. So do you know why it looks like what it looks like?
No, no.
So it's well, describe it to me.
I'm trying to. How would you describe the mask? It's kind of
Blue
so
and
well
gold
known
stripes,
that.
isn't it?
Yeah,
Blue and
yeah,
gold
yeah, yeah,
stripes.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the blue is lapis lazuli,
Yep.
the gold and the gold is gold, and that is because in the Egyptian belief or the Kemetic belief that the bones of the gods, through the use of or frozen, no,
No.
incidentally through the use of myrrh, he's transformed. The bones of the pharaoh are brought back together with the help of Isis and Nephthys to be built again as bones of gold, and the myrrh helps the blood to pass through putrefaction to keep away Set. And then Nephthys brings the fluids of the body back together to become the blue blood of the gods. So what you're seeing is the blue god. And so that transformation between he was immortal, then he became divine, kind of is an Achilles thing, if you think about it. He is the culmination of a divine parent and a mortal parent. They come together for this thing, so that you can see that as the royal blood as well, and the divine blood of the gods in Egypt, with that blue in the Yarrow.
So when it comes to astrological associations, what would you astrologically associate Yarrow with?
I don't know. Moon, I would say. But I also I want to say Mars, but I want to say the opposite of Mars, like Mars upside down. I can't quite articulate that. So everything that's you would use it for Mars problems. So heat in the blood, uh, inflammation, big tempers, those kind of Mars problems. So really, any Venus tempers Mars. So I would say Venus, but that doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
Tell me what you would say.
Yeah, I think probably the moon. There may be a bit of Chiron in there for that wound healing and that kind of bringing things around in that way as well. There are actually two asteroids. One's called Michael, one's called Saint Michael, which are associated with obviously the Archangel Michael. Which when you look at them in your chart, you can see where they are in the birth chart. And if they happen to be close to the sun or the moon or somewhere prominent in your chart, you normally I find people have a real connection to Michael, and for them, Yarrow would be really useful for them to work with as well. So that's always. So yeah, I think with such a diverse oil, one thing I always challenge with and feel challenged with is, you know, in our book Gifts of Essential Oils, we talk about each oil as a he or a her, just to kind of bring in that yin essence or that yang essence, and kind of with Yarrow, I'm normally referring it to as them, they, them, because of that backwards and forwards. And it ties in so interestingly. I didn't realize about, I knew about Achilles, and I must admit, I did know about him being dipped in the river Styx and his Achilles heel. Didn't realize about his relationship with the other man and having the dress of the woman, which is that kind of that dancing between that yin and yang, which really does, Yarrow and Achilles both have to do that. They have the hard and the soft aspects to them, don't they?
Yes, and actually, dancing is a really good word to use, because if you think of the strain that ballet dancers put onto their Achilles tendon, the women up on their points, but also just like stretching the point out, and turning the foot so that you turning the point out, really stretches the Achilles tendon. So that is often very, very inflamed. But also, if you think of how the men are these incredibly strong men, but they don't look masculine. They have this, and that is really kind of the personification of Achilles. That enormous strength, you wouldn't want to take a ballet dancer on, but then you'd be kind of like, you're going to bring it, but it's going to whap your ass because look at the power in all of those muscles. That really is like Achilles.
Yeah. On a side note, I guess if we do have any ballet dancers watching, the arrow would probably be really good for the torture that their feet and their bodies go through, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's partly how I came to fall in love with it, because of course I was a ballet dancer. And ladies, if your points, if you obviously I've got no points to hand, so anybody that has never worn a pair of ballet points should know that they are like an instrument of torture. So what you do is you put your foot into a cup, basically, of like cardboard. It's more like structured now than it was when I was younger. But so you sit in the cup and imagine that's your toes. Here is where the end of the cardboard comes into. So when you see these pictures of their feet all bleeding, the ends of the toes are bleeding, but particularly here, he's always bleeding because there's this rubbing at the end of the point all of the time. And yeah, Yarrow takes the sting out and it stops it bleeding. So it's great for blisters. Fantastic for that.
Yeah, I think in a roundabout way, we've actually, I think, personified Yarrow best. I think a male ballet dancer would probably really kind of capture that. I'm thinking, you threw a male ballet dancer in a wrestling ring against a wrestler, you'd kind of go, oh, well, my money's on the wrestler. But
yeah,
like you said, you never know.
Properly
they've got
scrappy.
skills. Yeah. Yeah, amazing. And chakra, what chakra would you attribute Yarrow to?
I'm going to say brow chakra, but I think purely because of the abilities to shapeshift and to be able to channel one's thoughts to do what you want them to do. But I do think it could be helpful for any chakra, to be honest. I talked about period pains and all of that stuff. That's going to be sacral chakra, the way that it's grounding so that you can do what you need to survive, that scrappiness. That's root chakra. You could pin it anywhere. We talked about how it's cleared. What is the word? I don't know. You're allowed to use it internally for digestive problems. Digestive problems at solar plexus. They wouldn't have done that if anything else was comparable. So solar plexus, heart. We've talked about how it is a heart salve. And I talked about how Venus tempers Mars. So Venus is heart chakra. Sore throats, definitely. So interesting, directed, clever, well thought out, controlled words. Throat chakra. Brow chakra, we've talked about how manifestation. But also you picked out a couple of things that very, very lots of like strange and arcane relationships with divination, with the I Ching, with the fact that he was predicted by an oracle, pineal, and Archangel Michael. I think we probably have to say crown chakra. So there are reasons to place it anywhere, and I would say any kind of physical illness, I'm going to use it. So that's true.
Yeah, I'm going to just take your answer for what you said with the third eye chakra and go, I normally use it for the third eye chakra and agree with what you said for that as well. One thing I will just sprung into my head as we're kind of coming to an end. When my early years, when I hadn't really got much experience of Yarrow, but I'd written in one of my files that Yarrow can often be toxic. And then I kind of had no exposure to Yarrow in many, many years. And then came back and worked with this beautiful Yarrow now that I showed before. And you've talked about it being safe for internal use. Is there any like types of Yarrow that we have to be careful of, or I can't remember where I found that information.
Yeah, so I perhaps didn't do my job very well there. So drinking Yarrow tea is safe for internal use. I'm sure you could use Yarrow oil, but I would be nervous of using that. But simply because I don't use oils internally very often. So the Yarrow family is massive. It's around about 3,000 different species. They come in all different colours. So we talk about how it's a white plant that grows in the on the waysides, but also like in gardens. Lots of we call them Achillea flowers. They're much taller. So there are lots and lots of ones. There is also certain concerns that it can be related to contact dermatitis, but I think it's a bit like, to me, saying that lavender can be stimulating. It's the exception that proves the rule. It's very unlikely that that's going to happen. It's so gentle, but of course, if you're the kind of person that's got really reactive, sensitive skin, don't just whack it on. Do a little bit of a patch test. Be sensible. And likewise, don't drink Yarrow for the sake of drinking Yarrow. If you feel particularly ill and you want to have a tiny little bit in some vodka to see how it goes, or in some honey, in some tea, don't use the bottle of oil. That's silly. Just, my sister's favourite word at the moment is be judicious. And I think in this situation, that's a very good word. Be judicious in your use. Yeah.
Well, I think hopefully we've done Yarrow justice. It is an amazing oil, probably one that, in the list of essential oils may not come up as one of a regularly used oil or regularly collected oil. But I think helping with anything with an itis, that's a long list, and it's definitely worth, having in your collection, because it's a problem we all face ongoingly, isn't it?
Yep, I love it. I would recommend it to anyone. If you said to me, sort of, it's not going to be my favourite oil, but it's up there in the top 5.
Do you know what we should do one day? I don't know when. Maybe when we get to episode 100 and have to retire this thing, we might do a finale where we go, okay, so what is our inner circle? Because I know that there's some oils that I absolutely love and you have an extreme disdain for. We might have to introduce our inner circle to everyone and let them know what we think should be in everyone's kit. And I'm sure we'll have lots of disagreements in that.
Idea. We should really have waited until the Yarrow was out in bloom, which is kind of June time. But I think when it does come out, I might just show it in a video and go, here we go. This is a Yarrow. Look, I've picked it outside, because it's not Yarrow weather. It's everything. It's vile outside. But yeah, it's that we talk about Australian plants all of the time, but this is one of our indigenous medicines that I think anybody in Europe should know how to use.
Amazing. Well, everyone knows what we're talking about next week. We're talking about valerian. You may also be wondering what's happening with our masterclasses. We're stirring our magical cauldron at the moment and creating something brand new. So stay tuned and we'll have the details for that coming to you in the weeks to come. But until then, take care of yourself. Go get some Yarrow, have some fun with it, and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.